My name is Isabella, and I am 32 years old. 6 months ago, my father cut all ties with me after my messy divorce, claiming I had brought shame to our family name. Last week, I took in a homeless 13-year-old boy named Marcus, who was living behind the dumpster at my apartment complex. Yesterday, while helping him with homework, he casually mentioned something that made my blood run cold. He said his father was a tech billionaire who abandoned him years ago. The name he whispered changed everything I thought I knew about my own family. Before we dive into this incredible story of family, betrayal, and unexpected justice, I want to know where you beautiful souls are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, and while you are here, smash that like button if you are ready for a wild ride of family drama that will leave you speechless. Do not forget to hit subscribe because, trust me, you will want to see how this shocking tale of karma unfolds. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. My marriage to David lasted 8 years, and for most of those years I believed we were building something beautiful together. We had met in college, both studying business, and everyone said we were the perfect couple. David came from money, old family wealth that stretched back generations, while I came from a middle-class background where my father worked as a regional bank manager. The cracks in our marriage started showing about 2 years ago when David became increasingly controlling. He began questioning every purchase I made, every friend I spent time with, and every decision I made about my career in marketing. What I initially mistook for concern slowly revealed itself as manipulation. He would isolate me from my friends by creating conflicts whenever I made plans, and he gradually convinced me to quit my job, claiming he made enough money for both of us. The breaking point came when I discovered David had been having an affair with his secretary Rachel for over a year. But that was not even the worst part. When I confronted him with evidence I had gathered, including hotel receipts and text messages, he did not deny it. Instead, he laughed and told me that Rachel was pregnant with his child. He said he had been planning to leave me anyway because I had become boring, and that I should be grateful he was giving me an easy way out. The divorce proceedings were brutal. David hired the most expensive lawyer in the city and fought me on everything. Since I had quit my job at his insistence, I had no recent income to show, and his legal team painted me as a gold digger who was trying to steal his family fortune. They dragged my character through the mud, bringing up every argument we had ever had and twisting them to make me look unstable and vindictive. What hurt the most was my father's reaction to the divorce. Instead of supporting me through the most difficult time of my life, he took David's side. My father had always been impressed by David's wealth and social status, often bragging to his friends about his successful son-in-law. When the divorce became public knowledge in our small community, my father became obsessed with what people would think about our family. The final straw came during a family dinner where I had hoped to find some comfort and support. Instead, my father spent the entire evening lecturing me about how I had ruined a good marriage through my stubbornness and unrealistic expectations. He said that David was a good provider and that I should have tried harder to make the marriage work, even suggesting that I should have been more understanding about his affair. When I tried to explain about the emotional abuse and control, my father dismissed my concerns as dramatics. He told me that marriage required sacrifice and that successful women knew how to keep their husbands happy. His words cut deeper than any wound David had ever inflicted because they came from the man who was supposed to protect me unconditionally. The breaking point in our relationship came when my father discovered that David's lawyer had offered me a settlement that included a small amount of money and the requirement that I sign a non-disclosure agreement about the affair. My father was furious that I had rejected this offer, calling me greedy and vindictive. He said I was trying to destroy David's reputation for revenge, and that I had become someone he no longer recognized. During our final argument, my father said words that still echo in my mind every day. He told me that I was no longer his daughter, and that I had brought such shame to our family that he could not bear to be associated with me anymore. He said that David had called him personally to explain how unreasonable I was being, and how I was trying to extort money from him through false accusations. That night, my father changed his will and removed me as his heir, leaving everything to my younger brother, Marcus, who had always been the golden child. He also blocked my phone number and told my extended family that they were not to have any contact with me. In one swift move, I lost not just my marriage, but my entire family support system. The divorce was finalized 3 months later, and I walked away with almost nothing. David's expensive lawyers had successfully argued that since I had not contributed financially to our household in recent years, and since there were no children involved, I was not entitled to significant spousal support. I received a small settlement that barely covered my legal fees and allowed me to rent a modest apartment across town. Finding work after being out of the job market for several years was incredibly challenging. Many potential employers questioned the gap in my resume, and without recent references, I struggled to prove my qualifications. I eventually found a position as a customer service representative at a small insurance company, making less than half of what I had earned before my marriage. The isolation was the hardest part to bear. My former friends who had been couple friends with David and me naturally sided with him after the divorce. They continued to include him in social gatherings while I was quietly removed from group chats and invitation lists. The few friends who reached out initially gradually drifted away as I struggled with depression and financial stress. Living paycheck to paycheck in a small apartment was a stark contrast to the comfortable life I had known during my marriage. I had to learn how to budget for groceries and utilities, skills I had not needed when David handled all our finances. Every day felt like a battle to maintain my dignity while rebuilding my life from scratch. The loneliness was overwhelming, especially during holidays and special occasions when I would have normally been surrounded by family. I spent my first Christmas after the divorce alone in my apartment, eating a frozen dinner and watching old movies, wondering how my life had fallen apart so completely. Despite everything, I was determined to rebuild and prove that I could create a meaningful life on my own terms. I threw myself into my work and began volunteering at a local literacy center teaching adults how to read. It was during one of these volunteer sessions that I first noticed Marcus, a teenager who would sometimes hang around the community center, looking hungry and tired. Marcus appeared in my life on a particularly cold October evening when I was taking out my trash behind the apartment complex. I nearly jumped out of my skin when I saw movement near the dumpster, but instead of finding a stray animal, I discovered a thin teenage boy huddled under a pile of cardboard boxes, trying to stay warm. My first instinct was to call the police or child services, but something about the terror in his eyes when he saw me made me pause. He looked like he was ready to run at any moment, and I could see that he was shivering uncontrollably in clothes that were far too thin for the weather. Instead of making him feel threatened, I quietly went back to my apartment and returned with a thermos of hot soup and a warm blanket. The boy who told me his name was Marcus was incredibly wary at first. He accepted the food and blanket but would not answer any questions about his family or how he had ended up living behind a dumpster. I could tell he had been on his own for a while because he had that careful, watchful demeanor that comes from having to constantly protect yourself from danger. Over the next few days, I made it a habit to bring Marcus food and check on him whenever I could do so without drawing attention from other residents. I learned that he was 13 years old and had been living on the streets for almost 6 months. He was incredibly intelligent, carrying around a worn backpack filled with library books that he would read by streetlight. What broke my heart was discovering that Marcus was still trying to attend school despite his living situation. He would clean himself up as best he could in public restrooms and show up to classes, though his teachers had started asking questions about his appearance and why he never had lunch money. He was terrified that if anyone discovered his situation, he would be placed in foster care, which he said was worse than living on the streets. After a week of our routine, I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. I approached Marcus with an offer that I had been considering carefully. I told him that I had a small apartment with a couch where he could sleep, access to hot showers and regular meals, and help with his homework if he needed it. In exchange, all I asked was that he be honest with me about his situation and that he continue going to school. Marcus was suspicious of my motives at first, which showed just how much he had learned to distrust adults. He asked me directly if I wanted something inappropriate from him, and when I assured him that I simply wanted to help another person who was going through a difficult time, he broke down in tears. Later, he told me that no adult had shown him genuine kindness in months. Bringing Marcus into my small apartment was like adding sunshine to a space that had felt dark and empty since my divorce. He was incredibly respectful of my belongings and space, always asking permission before using anything and insisting on helping with household chores. Despite everything he had been through, he maintained an optimistic outlook that inspired me every day. Marcus was also brilliant in ways that constantly amazed me. He could solve complex math problems in his head and had taught himself programming languages using library computers. His dream was to study computer science in college, though he often expressed doubt about whether that would ever be possible given his circumstances. As weeks turned into a month, Marcus began to open up about his past. He told me that he had been in several foster homes after his mother died when he was 10 years old. He never knew his father, only that his mother had once mentioned he was a wealthy man who wanted nothing to do with them. After aging out of a particularly bad foster situation, Marcus had decided he was better off on his own than trusting the system to protect him. The turning point in our relationship came when I was helping Marcus with a school project about successful entrepreneurs. He was researching various tech billionaires and their companies, showing a sophisticated understanding of business models and innovation strategies that impressed even me. As he scrolled through articles about different CEOs, he stopped at one particular photo and stared at it for a long time. When I asked what was wrong, Marcus pointed to the screen with a shaking finger. The article featured Richard Blackstone, founder and CEO of Blackstone Technologies, one of the most successful software companies in the country. Richard was known for his ruthless business practices and his very public statements about family values and supporting underprivileged children through various charitable foundations. Marcus told me that this man looked exactly like someone from a photograph his mother had kept hidden in her jewelry box. He said she had shown it to him once, when she was very sick, telling him it was a picture of his father, but that he should never try to contact him because he was a dangerous man who would never acknowledge their existence. My blood ran cold as Marcus continued his story. He explained that his mother had worked as a cleaning lady for several wealthy families and had met his father at one of these houses. She had been young and naive, believing his promises about leaving his wife and starting a new life together. When she discovered she was pregnant, the man had given her a substantial amount of money and threatened to destroy her life if she ever contacted him again or told anyone about their relationship. The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place in a way that made me feel sick to my stomach. Marcus described how his mother had used the money to buy a small house and raise him alone, but she had always been terrified that his father would somehow find them and take Marcus away from her. She had lived in constant fear until her death from cancer 3 years earlier. As I stared at the photo of Richard Blackstone, I realized why the name had seemed familiar when Marcus first mentioned it. Richard Blackstone was not just any tech billionaire. He was David's mentor and business partner, the man who had funded David's startup company and helped him build his wealth. David had often bragged about his close relationship with Richard, calling him a visionary and a father figure. The cold realization hit me like a physical blow. The homeless boy I had taken in was the abandoned son of my ex-husband's business partner and mentor. The same man who David idolized for his family values and charitable work had left his own child to grow up in poverty and eventually end up living on the streets. But the story was about to become even more twisted than I could have possibly imagined. The revelation about Marcus's father sent my mind racing with possibilities and questions that I needed answers to immediately. That night, after Marcus went to sleep on the couch, I began conducting my own investigation into Richard Blackstone and his connection to my ex-husband. What I discovered over the next several weeks would prove that the universe sometimes has its own way of serving justice. I started by researching everything I could find about Richard Blackstone's personal life and business dealings. Public records showed that he had been married to the same woman, Catherine, for over 20 years, and they had 2 children together who were now in college. He was frequently photographed at charity events, particularly those supporting underprivileged children and single mothers, which made the irony of his treatment of Marcus even more sickening. Digging deeper into business filings and partnership agreements, I discovered that Richard Blackstone had not just been David's mentor. He had been the primary investor in David's company from the very beginning. In fact, David's entire business empire was built on Richard's initial funding and ongoing financial support. The success that David had always claimed as his own achievement was actually the result of Richard's money and connections. But the most shocking discovery came when I found divorce records from Richard's first marriage, which had been sealed but were accessible through a contact I had made at the courthouse during my own divorce proceedings. Richard had been married before his current marriage, and that divorce had been finalized just months before Marcus's mother would have become pregnant. The timeline was damning. Richard had divorced his first wife, begun his relationship with Marcus's mother while she was working in his house, gotten her pregnant, abandoned her when she told him about the baby, and then married his current wife less than a year later. He had built his entire public image around family values, while simultaneously destroying the lives of his actual family members. I knew I needed help to fully understand the legal and financial implications of what I had discovered, so I reached out to Jennifer Walsh, a lawyer I had met at the Literacy Center where I volunteered. Jennifer specialized in family law and had mentioned during our conversations that she often took on pro bono cases involving children's rights. When I explained the situation to Jennifer, her reaction was immediate and intense. She told me that if we could prove Richard was Marcus's father, he could be held legally responsible for 18 years of child support, which would amount to hundreds of thousands of dollars. More importantly, Marcus would be entitled to inheritance rights as Richard's biological son, regardless of whether Richard acknowledged him. Jennifer agreed to help us pro bono partly because she was outraged by Richard's hypocrisy and partly because she saw an opportunity to take down a man who had built his fortune while abandoning his responsibilities. She explained that we would need DNA evidence to prove paternity, but she had ideas about how we could obtain that without alerting Richard to our investigation. Our next ally came from an unexpected source. Sarah Chen, an investigative journalist who had been trying to expose corruption in the tech industry, contacted me after Jennifer mentioned our case to a mutual friend. Sarah had been investigating Richard Blackstone for months, trying to find evidence of the unethical business practices that had made him wealthy, but she had been unable to find the smoking gun she needed for her story. Sarah was particularly interested in our case because she had already uncovered evidence that Richard had a pattern of exploiting vulnerable women. She had found records of several settlements he had paid to former employees who had accused him of sexual harassment. And she suspected there were other women like Marcus's mother who had been silenced with money and threats. The three of us formed an unlikely team, each bringing different skills and resources to the investigation. Jennifer handled the legal research and strategy. Sarah used her journalism connections to gather information and evidence, and I became the coordinator who helped piece together the timeline and connections between all the players involved. Our investigation revealed that David's business relationship with Richard went far deeper than just financial backing. They had been involved in several questionable deals together, including contracts with government agencies that appeared to have been obtained through bribery and influence peddling. David's company had been essentially operating as a front for some of Richard's more questionable business activities. Sarah's research also uncovered that Richard had been using his charitable foundation as a tax shelter and money laundering operation. The foundation, which claimed to support underprivileged children, had been funneling money back to Richard's personal accounts through fake consulting fees and inflated administrative costs. The hypocrisy was staggering. Richard was literally stealing money that was supposed to help children like Marcus. Meanwhile, I was working with Marcus to help him understand what we had discovered and what it might mean for his future. Initially, he was terrified at the idea of confronting his father, convinced that Richard would find a way to hurt him or make him disappear. Marcus had lived with the fear of his father's power for so long that he could not imagine a scenario where justice might actually be served. It took weeks of gentle conversations and reassurance before Marcus agreed to participate in our plan. The turning point came when I showed him articles about other children who had successfully sued wealthy fathers for abandonment and won substantial settlements. Marcus realized that he was not powerless and that his father's wealth and influence might actually work against him if the story became public. Jennifer developed a legal strategy that was both brilliant and comprehensive. Rather than simply pursuing a paternity suit, she planned to file a lawsuit that would expose all of Richard's illegal activities while simultaneously establishing Marcus's rights as his son. The lawsuit would include charges of child abandonment, fraud related to the charitable foundation, and conspiracy charges related to his business dealings with David. Sarah coordinated with several other journalists and news outlets to ensure that the story would receive maximum coverage when we were ready to go public. She had lined up interviews with other women who had been harmed by Richard and had gathered financial records that would prove the extent of his corruption. The most crucial part of our plan required getting DNA evidence to prove Marcus's paternity. Jennifer had researched Richard's schedule and discovered that he regularly attended charity events where he would eat and drink from glasses and plates that we could potentially collect for testing. Sarah had contacts at a private investigation firm who could discreetly obtain samples and have them tested without alerting Richard to what was happening. Our opportunity came at a charity gala that Richard was hosting for his foundation. Sarah had managed to get herself invited as a journalist covering the event, and she arranged for the investigation team to be working as temporary catering staff for the evening. The plan was to collect Richard's drinking glass and utensils after he finished eating, then have them rushed to a lab for DNA extraction and testing. The night of the gala, everything went according to plan. Richard never suspected that his own charitable event was being used to gather evidence against him. Within 48 hours, we had definitive proof that Marcus was Richard Blackstone's biological son. Jennifer immediately began preparing the lawsuit, which would be filed in federal court due to the interstate nature of Richard's business dealings and the criminal charges involved. She coordinated with the FBI's white-collar crime division, who had been investigating Richard's company for potential fraud and were eager to have additional evidence to support their case. As we prepared for the legal battle ahead, I felt a sense of purpose and determination that I had not experienced since before my marriage fell apart. This was not just about getting justice for Marcus, though that was certainly the most important goal. This was also about exposing the corruption and hypocrisy that had allowed men like Richard and David to build their wealth by destroying other people's lives. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the tech industry and finally give Marcus the justice he deserved. The morning we filed the lawsuit, Jennifer, Sarah, and I met at the courthouse at dawn to ensure everything was submitted before Richard's team could mount any preemptive legal defense. The 47-page complaint we filed was a masterpiece of legal strategy that simultaneously established Marcus's paternity rights while exposing the criminal enterprise that Richard had been operating for decades. Within hours of filing, Sarah's article went live on the front page of the city's largest newspaper, accompanied by a comprehensive online investigation that included audio recordings, financial documents, and testimonies from multiple victims. The headline read, "Tech billionaire's secret son lived homeless, while father donated millions to children's charities." The irony was not lost on anyone. The story spread like wildfire across social media and news networks. Richard's carefully crafted public image began crumbling within hours as people shared the article with expressions of outrage and disbelief. The comment sections were filled with people expressing disgust at the hypocrisy of a man who had built his reputation on helping disadvantaged children while his own son had been sleeping behind dumpsters. Richard's initial response was exactly what we had expected. His lawyers immediately issued a statement denying all allegations and threatening to sue us for defamation. They claimed the DNA evidence was fabricated and that Marcus was part of an elaborate extortion scheme designed to damage Richard's reputation and steal his money. But Richard had underestimated how thoroughly we had prepared our case. Jennifer had anticipated every possible defense strategy and had gathered evidence to counter each one. When Richard's team claimed the DNA evidence was fake, we provided documentation of the chain of custody and offered to have the testing repeated by any laboratory of their choosing. When they suggested Marcus was lying about his identity, Sarah published copies of his birth certificate, school records, and medical records that clearly established his timeline and background. We also had testimony from social workers and teachers who had known Marcus throughout his time in foster care, people who had no reason to participate in any alleged conspiracy against Richard. The turning point came when other victims began coming forward with their own stories. Sarah's investigation had given courage to women who had been silenced by Richard's money and legal threats for years. 3 former employees filed sexual harassment lawsuits. 2 other women came forward with stories of being abandoned after becoming pregnant by Richard, and several former business partners provided evidence of fraudulent deals and bribery schemes. The FBI raid on Richard's offices happened on a Thursday morning just 5 days after our lawsuit was filed. Federal agents seized computers, financial records, and documents related to both his business operations and his charitable foundation. The images of Richard being escorted from his building in handcuffs were broadcast on every major news network and became the most shared news story of the week. David's connection to Richard's criminal activities soon became clear as the FBI investigation expanded. The startup company that had made David wealthy was revealed to be a shell corporation designed to launder money from Richard's illegal government contracts. David's expensive lifestyle and ability to afford the best divorce lawyers had been funded entirely by criminal proceeds. When federal agents raided David's home and business, they discovered evidence that he had been actively involved in the money laundering scheme from the beginning. The affair that had destroyed our marriage suddenly seemed trivial compared to the criminal conspiracy that David had been participating in while playing the role of successful businessman. The media attention surrounding the case was overwhelming, but ultimately beneficial to our cause. Marcus's story resonated with people across the country who were outraged by the injustice he had suffered. A crowdfunding campaign that Sarah had helped establish to cover Marcus's educational expenses raised over $200,000 in less than a week. Richard's business empire began collapsing as investors withdrew their support and government contracts were canceled pending the criminal investigation. Stock prices for his companies plummeted, and several board members resigned in disgrace. The charitable foundation was shut down by federal regulators, and its remaining assets were seized to compensate victims of Richard's fraud. The psychological impact on Richard was evident during his first court appearance. The confident, commanding presence he had always projected was replaced by a broken man who could barely make eye contact with the judge. His wife had filed for divorce and taken their children out of state, leaving him isolated and facing the possibility of decades in federal prison. Marcus handled the media attention with remarkable maturity and grace. When reporters asked him how he felt about finally getting justice, he simply said that he hoped his story would help other children in similar situations and that no amount of money could give him back the childhood that had been stolen from him. The legal proceedings moved quickly due to the overwhelming evidence against Richard. Faced with the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison, his lawyers began negotiating a plea agreement that would include full restitution to Marcus and cooperation with the ongoing federal investigation into government corruption. Jennifer negotiated a settlement that exceeded our wildest expectations. Marcus would receive 18 years of retroactive child support calculated at the maximum allowable rate for Richard's income level plus damages for emotional distress and punitive damages for the abandonment. The total settlement amount was over $12 million, enough to secure Marcus's future and fund his education through graduate school. But the financial settlement was only part of the justice Marcus received. Richard was required to publicly acknowledge Marcus as his son and to write a personal letter of apology that would be released to the media. In that letter, Richard admitted to abandoning Marcus, and his mother acknowledged the suffering he had caused and expressed his shame at having built a public image based on helping children while failing his own son. The ripple effects of our victory extended far beyond just our case. The investigation into Richard's activities led to a comprehensive review of government contracting procedures and new regulations designed to prevent the kind of corruption he had been engaging in. Several other tech executives were investigated and charged with similar crimes, leading to what media outlets called a reckoning in the industry. Sarah won a Pulitzer Prize for her investigative reporting on the case, and she used the platform to continue exposing corruption and advocating for vulnerable children. Jennifer's law firm gained national recognition for their work on the case, and she was invited to speak at law schools about using legal strategy to achieve social justice. The weeks following Richard's arrest, and the public exposure of his crimes brought a series of revelations that continued to shock everyone involved. As federal investigators dug deeper into his business dealings, they uncovered a web of corruption that extended far beyond what we had initially suspected. David's arrest came just 2 weeks after Richard's, when FBI agents raided his home at dawn and found him attempting to destroy computer hard drives containing evidence of his participation in the money laundering scheme. The images of my ex-husband being led away in handcuffs, while his pregnant girlfriend Rachel watched from the doorway, provided me with a sense of vindication that I had never expected to feel. The criminal charges against David were extensive and damning. In addition to money laundering and fraud, he was charged with tax evasion, bribery of government officials, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The prosecution's evidence showed that David had not only been aware of Richard's illegal activities, but had actively participated in designing the shell companies and fake contracts that had enabled their criminal enterprise. What made David's situation even more devastating was the discovery that most of his apparent wealth had been illusion. The expensive house, luxury cars, and lavish lifestyle he had maintained during our marriage had been financed entirely through loans secured against future proceeds from the criminal enterprise. When Richard's assets were seized and the illegal income stream stopped, David's creditors immediately began foreclosure and repossession proceedings. Rachel, who had been so confident about her future with David and their unborn child, suddenly found herself facing financial ruin and social disgrace. The expensive engagement ring David had given her turned out to be purchased with laundered money and was seized as evidence. She quickly discovered that the man she thought was a successful entrepreneur was actually a criminal who had no legitimate assets to support her or their child. The revelation about David's true financial situation provided the final piece of vindication I needed regarding our divorce. His expensive lawyers and aggressive tactics had been funded by criminal proceeds, while he had fought to deny me any share of what I now knew were stolen assets. The settlement I had ultimately rejected, which my father had been so angry about, had been an attempt to buy my silence about activities that could have sent David to prison. My father's reaction to these revelations was perhaps the most painful aspect of the entire ordeal. Even when presented with overwhelming evidence of David's criminal activities and proof that I had been telling the truth about the emotional abuse I had suffered, he refused to acknowledge that he had been wrong about the Queeple situation. Instead of apologizing for disowning me or expressing concern about how I had been treated, my father doubled down on his position. He claimed that I had somehow orchestrated the entire investigation as revenge against David, and that I was responsible for destroying a good man's reputation. His refusal to accept reality, even when confronted with FBI evidence and federal criminal charges, showed me just how toxic our relationship had truly been. The most heartbreaking moment came when my father called me for the first time since he had disowned me, not to apologize or reconcile, but to ask me to use my connection to the federal investigation to help David avoid prison time. He seemed genuinely shocked when I refused and told him that David deserved to face the consequences of his criminal choices. During that final conversation, my father revealed something that explained so much about his behavior throughout my marriage and divorce. He admitted that David had been giving him money regularly throughout our marriage, supposedly as investments in his retirement fund, but actually as bribes to ensure his support and loyalty. My father had been financially dependent on David's continued success and had been terrified that my divorce would expose their arrangement. This revelation explained why my father had been so desperate to preserve David's reputation and why he had been willing to sacrifice his relationship with me to maintain David's support. It also meant that my father had been receiving stolen money for years and could potentially face his own legal consequences if the FBI investigation expanded to include his financial arrangements with David. Marcus watched these developments with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. While he was gratified to see justice being served, he was also witnessing the destruction of multiple families and the revelation of betrayals that mirrored his own experiences with abandonment and rejection. His maturity and wisdom throughout this process continually amazed everyone who worked with him. The media attention continued to be intense, with reporters constantly seeking interviews and updates about the case. Marcus and I made a decision to limit our public statements and focus on moving forward with our lives rather than being consumed by the drama surrounding the legal proceedings. Richard's mental deterioration became apparent during his court appearances. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and intimidated competitors was now a broken shell who seemed unable to comprehend how completely his life had been destroyed. His lawyers filed several motions claiming diminished capacity, but psychological evaluations confirmed that he was competent to stand trial and understand the charges against him. The dissolution of Richard's business empire had far-reaching consequences beyond just his immediate family. Hundreds of employees lost their jobs when his companies were shut down or sold to pay restitution to victims and cover legal fees. Several smaller businesses that had depended on contracts with Richard's companies also failed, creating a ripple effect of economic damage throughout the community. Catherine Blackstone, Richard's wife, filed for divorce and moved across the country with their children to escape the media attention and social stigma associated with their father's crimes. She also filed a lawsuit seeking to recover assets that she claimed had been stolen from the family's legitimate business interests to fund Richard's criminal activities. The charitable foundation that had been the centerpiece of Richard's public image was revealed to be even more corrupt than we had initially suspected. Federal auditors discovered that over 80% of donated funds had been diverted to personal accounts or used to pay for Richard's lavish lifestyle. The foundation had been essentially stealing money from people who thought they were helping disadvantaged children. As the dust began to settle from these revelations, Marcus and I found ourselves facing a future that neither of us could have imagined just months earlier. The settlement money would ensure Marcus's financial security and educational opportunities, but more importantly, he had gained something that money could not buy: the knowledge that justice had been served and that the man who had abandoned him had finally been held accountable for his actions. 6 months after the FBI raids and criminal charges, both Richard and David had been sentenced to federal prison. Richard received 25 years for fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion, while David got 15 years for his role in the conspiracy. The judge in Richard's case specifically mentioned Marcus during sentencing, saying that Richard's abandonment of his own child, while publicly advocating for children's welfare, demonstrated a level of hypocrisy that warranted the maximum possible punishment. Marcus and I had settled into a comfortable routine that felt more like a real family than either of us had experienced in years. He was thriving in his studies, having enrolled in advanced placement courses that would allow him to graduate high school early and begin college with a significant head start. The trauma of his homeless months was healing gradually through therapy and the stability of having a secure home environment. The settlement money had been placed in carefully managed trust accounts that would fund Marcus's education through graduate school and provide him with a substantial nest egg for starting his adult life. More importantly, Marcus had gained legal recognition as Richard's son, which gave him not only financial security but also a sense of identity and legitimacy that he had never possessed before. Jennifer had used our success to build a practice specializing in cases involving wealthy individuals who had abandoned their parental responsibilities. She had taken on several similar cases and had developed a reputation as a lawyer who could take on powerful opponents and win. The legal precedents established in Marcus's case had made it easier for other abandoned children to seek justice against wealthy biological parents. Sarah's continued investigation into government corruption had led to congressional hearings and new legislation designed to prevent the kind of systematic fraud that Richard had been able to perpetrate for so many years. Her work had earned her national recognition and had opened doors for her to investigate other cases involving the abuse of power by wealthy individuals and corporations. My own life had been transformed in ways I could never have anticipated. The insurance company where I had been working promoted me to a management position after my story became public, and several other companies had approached me with job offers that recognized both my professional skills and my newfound public profile as an advocate for justice. More surprisingly, I had received dozens of letters and messages from other women who had experienced similar situations with abusive marriages and family rejection. Many of them had drawn inspiration from my story and had found the courage to leave toxic relationships or seek help for domestic abuse situations. My relationship with my father remained severed, and I had come to accept that it might never be repaired. He continued to refuse to acknowledge any wrongdoing in his treatment of me, even after David's criminal conviction had vindicated everything I had said about my marriage. Some relationships, I realized, are too damaged by betrayal and toxicity to be salvaged regardless of blood connections. My brother had reached out to me privately to express his regret about how our family had handled the situation. He admitted that he had always known our father favored him, but had not realized the extent to which he had been willing to sacrifice me to maintain his relationship with David's money. While we were slowly rebuilding our relationship, it would take time to overcome years of family dysfunction and favoritism. The most unexpected development had been the romantic relationship that had begun developing between Jennifer and me. What started as a professional partnership had gradually evolved into a deep friendship and eventually into something more meaningful. Both of us had been through difficult divorces and had learned to value genuine partnership and mutual respect over superficial attractions or financial considerations. Marcus had played an inadvertent role as matchmaker, often commenting on how well Jennifer and I worked together, and how happy we both seemed when we were collaborating on legal strategies or planning for his future. His approval meant everything to me, and his excitement about the possibility of having Jennifer as a more permanent part of our family was one of the factors that encouraged us to explore our feelings for each other. The media attention had largely died down, though our story was occasionally referenced in articles about justice being served or the importance of investigating powerful individuals who abused their positions. Marcus and I had both become more selective about public appearances, preferring to focus on building our new life together rather than remaining in the spotlight. Richard's imprisonment had provided Marcus with the closure he needed to begin truly healing from his childhood trauma. Knowing that his father was finally being punished for his crimes and that his own story had helped expose corruption that had harmed many others gave Marcus a sense of purpose and justice that therapy alone could never have provided. The charitable foundation that had been shut down was replaced by a new organization managed by federal oversight that was actually dedicated to helping homeless children and teenagers. Marcus had been invited to serve on the Youth Advisory Board, where his personal experience with homelessness provided valuable insights into how to effectively reach and help vulnerable young people. As I reflect on this incredible journey from divorce and abandonment to justice and new beginnings, I am amazed at how completely my life has been transformed. The woman who was discarded by her husband and disowned by her father has become someone who helped expose criminal corruption and secure justice for an abandoned child. The most important lesson I learned is that real family is not always determined by blood relationships or legal marriages. Marcus and I chose each other, and that choice has created a bond stronger than anything I experienced in my biological family or my marriage. Sometimes, the people who become our true family are the ones who find us when we need each other most. Today, Marcus is preparing for his first year of college, where he will study computer science and business with the goal of starting his own technology company that actually helps people rather than exploiting them. Jennifer and I are planning our wedding for next spring, and we have already begun the legal process of having me formally adopt Marcus so that our family will be recognized in every possible way. The homeless boy who once slept behind dumpsters is now a confident young man with unlimited possibilities ahead of him. The divorced woman who was abandoned by everyone she trusted has found genuine love and created a family based on choice rather than obligation. And the billionaire who thought his wealth and power made him untouchable is spending his remaining years in federal prison, finally paying for the lives he destroyed. What started as the worst period of my life has become the foundation for the best chapters still to come. Have you ever experienced a moment when what seemed like your greatest loss turned into your most important victory? I would love to hear your stories about family karma and unexpected justice in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life tales of people who refuse to let powerful individuals get away with destroying innocent lives. Share this video with anyone who needs to remember that sometimes the universe has its own way of balancing the scales. Thank you for taking this journey with me, and remember that your current struggles might just be preparing you for your greatest triumphs. Life has a way of bringing justice to those who refuse to give up fighting for what is right.